Hi, guys. All right, I hope you're having a great day, working it hard at home, learning, growing those brains. All right, today we get to read chapter 10, The Family Begins to Starve. Oh, no. Remember, poor Charlie's family is so poor. They have hardly any food, and now it sounds like it's even worse. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. Same thing is happening for us. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw the huge flakes drifting slowly down out of an icy sky that was the color of steel. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door just to get to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. What do you think a gale is? Listen to the clues in the sentence. A freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. What do you know that's freezing and it blows? Did you guess wind? If you did, you were right. Yay! And oh, how bitter cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made out of ice. Each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife across his cheek. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides, the windows, and under the doors, and there was no place to escape from them. The 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the 2 important problems of trying to keep warm and getting enough to eat. There was something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we realize, we usually get what we want or near enough. But poor Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, the birthday one and the one that Grandpa Joe bought with his only money, had long since been nibbled away, and all Charlie got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. And then all at once, the meals became thinner. The reason for this was the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went broke and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck at all. By a quarter of the food that 7 people needed, the situation became desperate. Breakfast was now a single slice of bread for each person, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve. And every day, little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory. And every day as he came near to it, he would lift his small pointed nose high in the sky and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep, swallowing breaths as though he was trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head up from under the blanket on one icy morning, "that child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're too old to bother with, but he is a growing boy. He cannot go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." "What can one do?" murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I heard his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate this morning at breakfast, but he would not touch it. He made her take it back." What kind of character would you say that Charlie is? We know he's a boy, but what would you say about him? He's very blank. What kind of describing word, what juicy word describes Charlie? His mom tried to give him her breakfast so that he would have a full tummy, but he would not take it. He made her take it back and eat it herself. What would you say about him? Would you say he's very kind? I would. He's very kind and what we call selfless. That means the opposite of selfish. He cares about everybody, not just himself. He's a fine little fellow, said Grandpa George, and he deserves better than this. The cruel weather went on, and every day poor Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over the cheeks you could see the shapes of the bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to do little things. He began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did so as to save what little strength he had. In the mornings, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so he could walk slowly to school without ever having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during recess by himself, resting, while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully, resting his body to prevent exhaustion. If you don't know this, the food that you eat is what gives you energy to play and run and jump and all the fun things that kids like to do. When you don't have very much food to eat, it makes your body very tired. So poor Charlie is trying to save what little bit of energy that he has for the things that he has to do, like walk home each day and walk to school. And he's trying not to do extra things like play around. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face, and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye was caught suddenly by a piece of paper that was lying in the gutter in the snow. The paper was a greenish color, and there was something vaguely familiar about it. What kind of paper do you know that is greenish? Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a dollar bill. Green paper, right? Quickly, he looked around. Had somebody else dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way it had been buried. It had been there for a little while. Several people went hurrying past him on the sidewalk, their chins sunk deep in the collars of their coats, their feet crunching in the snow. None of them were searching for any money. None of them were taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then was it his? This dollar? His? Could he have it? Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole dollar. He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him at this very moment, and only one thing. What do you think that dollar bill means to Charlie? What can he buy with his money? Think about what's the thing he wants more than anything else right now with the way him and his family are feeling. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving toward the nearest shop. It was only 10 steps away. It was a newspaper and stationery store, the kind that sells almost everything, including candy and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quietly and quickly to himself, was buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there. And the rest of the money, he would take straight back home and give it to his mother. And that's where our chapter ends. Tomorrow, when I see you in class, we'll read chapter 11, The Miracle. Bye, guys. I hope you enjoyed Charlie and the Chocolate Factory today.